Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your patience in staying till the evening. I know you all had a long day, and I hope it will be worth it. I want to thank Ian for inviting me and for this opportunity to think again about the issues that you've been puzzling about and addressing. It's a regional problem. It's not a Bohemian problem. And I want to join you this evening in the lamentation and the problem solving, and see if together we can figure out what's wrong and how to fix it. So I'm going to be using the term benefits politics interchangeably with patronage politics and patron clientelism. So I'm using the term benefits politics as the local term that we use in Jamaica to describe patronage politics. I'm going to be telling a lot of stories tonight so that you can have a vivid sense of how this thing actually works rather than giving you pure political theory. And so by way of appealing to your sense of humor, I want to give you a sense of the moral climate and the moral culture in which benefits politics flourishes. We have a wonderful stadium that was built in Jamaica in time for just after independence. And it's a beautiful stadium, and all of our major athletic and national events take place there. And I believe it was during the time of Michael Manley's regime that he gave a free concert at the stadium, and people were pouring through the gates. But there were a couple of fellows on the outside who, apparently not receiving the memo that the concert was free, decided that they'd scale the fence. The second experience that I had personally, and this is a personal experience, was that I fancied myself a scholar of the urban poor and their wiles and craftiness, because that's a book I wrote about that in a book extensively. Well, my mother and I went to the market down in the working class neighborhood, and we shopped, got our fruits and vegetables, and I was waiting for her to buy one last item, and so I was waiting with several bags, plastic bags, with the food and the groceries that we had just purchased. So right across from me, less than about 10 feet away, a woman saw me with all these bags and said, "You're carrying too many bags, why don't you just consolidate them and put them all in one bag instead of carrying all of these bags?" I left my bag where I was standing and just went right across, as I said, about 10 feet away to buy the larger bag that she was willing to sell me. When I returned and turned around, all my goods were gone. So this is coming from somebody who thinks he knows about the social power of the urban poor. So today I just want to get a sense of how did things get this way, and how does it involve the political institutions in Jamaica. So what I offer you here today is a cautionary tale that Jamaica is an example of, and to say to you, this could happen to you if in the Bahamas or other islands if you're not careful. So what I want to say today concerns a paradox in the practice of modern politics, and that is, how is it that contemporary democratic political institutions like free elections and party competition can become the means for undermining democracy itself? Everywhere across the world, in both Western and non-Western constitutional democracies, in both rich and poor countries, we see this paradox: democratically elected governments engaging in corrupt practices and a pattern of abuse of power, and often getting away with it. This abuse includes, but is not limited to, cronyism, where favored elites and others are given contracts and insider benefits. It may also involve patron clientelism, that term that I used earlier, to talk about patronage, where votes are exchanged for votes of political loyalists are exchanged for favors of all kinds. This kind of misrule may extend to outright bribery of state officials in return for political favors. In its extreme form, this pattern of corruption may even extend to politicians and state officials, ties to organized crime syndicates, and personalities seeking access to the state. Moreover, where you have unequal class structures, and these persist in these societies, democratic elections may become the basis for the exercise of exclusionary class rule. Free elections may allow the class coalition that happens to be in power to bar access to the outsiders, and barring access to valued public goods like education, welfare, health, housing, and the like. But the coalition may also deny opportunities for participation, access to political power, or they may constrain upward mobility to opportunity or to cultural respect and recognition. This exclusionary politics typically brings with it repression of political opponents, extraction of wealth by powerful elites, and political protection of it. Or the exclusionary politics in democratic societies may also involve suppression or co-optation of civil society groups, and even the subjection of the bureaucracy and legislature to corrupt political control by vested interests. In the worst of cases involving democratically elected incumbents, nominally democratic regimes and state institutions, for example, may be politicized to such an extent that the judiciary, the legislature, the army, the police, as well as public agencies end up merely doing the bidding of the chief executive. The political scientist Samuel Huntington called this condition in which political and economic elites exercise unchecked power with little or no accountability to other state institutions or to powerful civil society groups. He called it a form of political decay. The point that I want to make today is that for like reasons, Jamaican politics and political institutions may be regarded as being in an advanced condition of political decay. And you may want to reflect on your own circumstances here to see how far things have gone. Now, my argument is not one. And it is that in Jamaica, a major political institution designed to foster democratic rule, that is parliamentary multi-party activity, has been severely undermined democratic governance. This was no accident, I argue, because it is arguable that this development, rather than being a side effect of vigorous contestation for political office, is in reality a deliberate strategy of power exercised by the political cartel that is the two-party system in Jamaica. Not only that, democratic multi-partyism in Jamaica early on saw fit to invite into politics anomic groups and criminal elements into the state system as political allies, if you can believe that. Multi-partyism as practiced in Jamaica has put the interests of restive, alienated, and often piratic communities of the urban poor at the very heart of electoral politics and at the disposal of state institutions. And in recent decades, it has even expanded the ongoing criminalization of the state to include members of organized crime syndicates and personalities. Even more worrisome is the fact that Jamaica's now consolidated patronage state, and that's what I prefer to call it, the patronage state, by dint of social mobilization, this is how they're doing it and this is how they've done it, by social mobilization, by cultural predation, that is to say that they prey on the popular culture of the people, to curry favor with them, to win votes, and to seem culturally familiar while doing something else. And of course, they also use ideological populism. And doing all of this, they managed to give moral cover to a culture of dependency and a condition of slavish supplicancy among political loyalists. Here are some of the harmful effects of political clientelism, benefits politics. You take your pick. The patronage-driven state has, for over 53 years of political independence, legitimized now habituated antisocial dispositions. Jamaica's patronage-driven state system, despite an early attempt, and it was ill-conceived, and it failed, this was an early attempt to impose a culture of moral restraint and self-discipline on the wider population. They had to abandon this Eurocentric socializing mission because people saw through it, saw it for what it was, and it was effectively criticized by the Rastafarians and others for the reasons you know well, that we're not going to imitate Europe, we're going to be ourselves. At any rate, they substituted that Eurocentric orientation in favor of a politically driven concession to lower class norms and anti-system values. The rationale was a search for political advantage with poor communities. The consequence was accommodation to an emergent piratical behavioral culture that celebrated antisocial, uncivil acts as part of the moral everydayness of the disadvantaged in Jamaica. That is, the disturbing cultural accretions generated by violent winner-take-all politics created a society which, save for the most gruesome forms of violence and mayhem, the commission of crime, resort to moral vice, thievery, blatant outlawry, corrupt acts of all kinds, are deemed in the local parlance to be just a part of the runnings. This is how we do things. You can't do much about it. And so it's simply a phenomenon of everyday life, hardly requiring censure or public embarrassment. Instances of the ongoing decay and moral collapse on the island are legendary and far too numerous to mention here. I'll merely mention 4 to illustrate the decay. First, in the turbulent decade of the 1960s, of the 1970s, I beg your pardon, a fellow called Winston Burry Boy, that's his nickname, Burry Boy Blake, and I think you have similar nomenclature for your fellows, Livingston Togi Bullard and Wesler Bobo, the Vilma. Yeah, you're familiar with the type. Yeah, well, Winston Burry Boy Blake, a known gunman and enforcer for one of the dominant political parties in a strategic urban constituency, was killed by an assailant in the ongoing violent clashes of the 70s. Now, instead of condemnation or derision for his role in enacting mayhem and violence and death among in his poor communities, PNP politicians and over-loyal partisans from Blake's community greeted his death as an awful tragedy and publicly mourned the gunman. And an estimated throng of some thousands attended his funeral, including the then Prime Minister, Michael Manley, and several members of his cabinet. The second example, in 1998, another PNP enforcer and organized crime figure, Donald Zeeks Phipps, was arrested, detained, and charged with the attempted murder of an errant member of the urban community which he controlled and had fallen afoul of the enforcer's law. Rather than be delighted at his arrest, his community members rioted in the center of Kingston and demanded his release. and then expressed their fury against the security forces by massing up outside of the police station where he was being held. To the consternation of the civil society group and other law-abiding citizens, the police asked Phipps to speak to the crowd and calm them down. And he assured them that he was going to be fine, that he was going to be released soon, and that they should go home, which is what they did. And Mr. Phipps did get released, was put on trial, and escaped conviction. The third one is the one you perhaps know the best. Mr. Christopher Douglas Koch, right, in 2010. Another one of these criminal organized crime figures in a JLP area, which was controlled by his gang. And the United States requested his extradition in 2009. Well, as you perhaps know, rather than extraditing this criminal to the United States, the Jamaica government dragged its feet for some 9 months before pressure was put on them to release him. Again, as in the case of Phipps, the community of Tivoli, which is the neighborhood he controlled, rioted. Well, I shouldn't say rioted, men took up arms against the Jamaican government. And there was a armed confrontation that resulted in 72 lives being lost in this armed confrontation between Dudis's, that's his nickname, Christopher Koch's militia, and the security forces of Jamaica. So there was, of course, political costs to be paid for that kind of embarrassment, to say the least, because Jamaica is now going to be known as a narco state. And the ultimate price was paid by the Prime Minister when he resigned the following year. Just for his, decency's sake, he waited for the following year to resign. Finally, there's the experience of a small businessman who lived in the United States and decided that he'd return home to open a business. He opened a small factory recycling used bottles and shipping them back to the United States. He opened his factory in a small urban community in the western part of Kingston, and he provided jobs for previously unemployed people, paid his taxes, and the neighborhood saw an innovative entrepreneur come to relieve the bleak urban landscape that existed at the time. Well, no sooner had his recycling business begun and to thrive that local organized crime figures appeared at the factory gates. And the communication was direct and straightforward. You've got to pay extortion money every month. He decided that he was not going to pay the extortion money, and he went to the police. The police told him that there was not really much they could do. Did he have a gun? They asked. And then he said no. Then they suggested that maybe then you could either hire an expensive security company, or better yet, hire your own thugs, or still yet, pay the extortion money. And this is coming from the police.
The law and order.
The law and order forces in the country. And of course, when he went to the MP, he didn't really get much benefit there. So and threats were made on his life. And so facing this kind of situation, he packed up his things and moved back to the United States. So the people who had their jobs lost their jobs. The government taxes, no more taxes from this employer, and an embittered, I can tell you, an embittered businessman left the country to give, his story to other people. These dispiriting stories are commonplace in Jamaica. They confirm not just the impunity criminals enjoy in the country today, but these tales reveal as well the insidious link between politics and crime in the country. That connection in which organized crime syndicates pursue relations with politicians deepen their penetration of the Jamaican state and are in turn protected by it. And this represents an existential threat to the country, as it will to all small islands like ours, right? How did such a thing come to pass? What's the connection between Jamaica's practice of democracy and the continuing erosion of democratic values, right? We have this bizarre situation, right? The practice of democracy and the erosion of democratic values. And what explains the deepened decay of the country's democratic institutions? And how does this relate to the two-party system in the country? I think part of the answer has to do with the anti-colonial roots of patronage politics. It has anti-colonial roots. Because to understand such a thing, how such a thing could happen, it's best to look at the combination of factors that help create a monopolistic, invasive, and predatory party system in Jamaica. Simply put, the competition for political power before and after independence gave rise to a worrisome but universal phenomenon, the ubiquitous politics of patronage. It would outlast all attempts to curb it as a powerful force in the country's political life. In economically dependent countries like Jamaica, patronage politics had its roots in the struggle to end colonial rule. And as is well known, organized anti-colonial politics drew hitherto excluded and unorganized native groups into the political process. This was a good thing, but fraught with potential for abuse. The main features of anti-colonial mass politics were high levels of political mobilization, the declaration that the colonized possessed the right to their political independence, and that they were culturally distinct from the colonizers. These same themes, with modifications to suit the needs of party competition, would actually define the political culture of the parties and the assertion and defense of popular claim in order to win support after independence, so that the same issues that people were mobilized around to get independence continued after independence in order to keep the people who were in power to retain their positions. The same kind of mobilization, but instead of having external enemies now, the enemy was now internal. So, during the political struggle for independence, the state was the great prize that was sought. And the promise was that with political independence, you will get all the good things that come with that. And that, of course, meant cultural recognition, it meant political participation, and it meant welfare. And that's a euphemism. Welfare. Jobs, contracts, farm work, and you name it, housing and the like. All right? So the form that the independence struggle took in Jamaica made patronage politics inevitable, both before and after independence was achieved. And the advent and growth of this institution in a highly dependent country like Jamaica would trump wider concerns for the establishment of strong, independent political institutions that could check the power of the parties distributing benefits, right? And so you didn't really have any countervailing institutions to contain them. So it's arguable that Jamaica's post-independence political history then is really the story of how political clientelism became invasive and parasitic, and of how benefits politics introduced the gradual colonization and corruption of other institutions. It's the story of how partyism, two-partyism, becomes the vehicle for corrupt clientelist practices, how it established its unchecked institutional dominance, and how far it has held at bay reformers' attempt to bring it to account. I want to turn next to the patronage state and what I call the mobilization of dependency. I think it would be incomplete to identify clientelism only with enabling the decay of political institutions. That's one effect. Its equally insidious effect is its displacement and corruption of the citizen's ability to cultivate his own capacity for agency and independent thought. And that's some of the things that you've been saying here today, right? Effective citizenship has been lost. So that partisan political mobilization on the basis of violence-ridden patronage disabled a necessary and vital condition for a vigorous democratic society, namely the capacity for civic engagement. What the patronage state did was to create in the Jamaican people a mobilized dependency. They were summoned to an engagement in politics, the mobilization part, but solely for the partisan requirements of political competition. So this was not for citizenship, mobilization for citizenship, like we've been saying here today. This was simply for the narrow partisan interests of the parties. And this dependency arrested the potential for realizing what people call the civic capacity among the people. Civic capacity. That is, the politics of patronage disabled the critical sensibilities so necessary for the functioning of a democratic society, so necessary for holding leaders accountable and making them responsive to engaged citizens, what we've been saying here all along. So that benefits politics arrested the potential for independent thought that would drive the citizens' active agency in the construction of a democratic society. In its stead, partyism promoted what we call in Jamaica dog-hearted values, offering the people what one commentator called the legal lawlessness, offering them the legal lawlessness of party politics in the name of holding political office. And this had the terrible effect of undermining the ethical basis for political reflection and political engagement, because patronage politics crippled individual and group conscience across the land. The consequence was not just institutional decay, but a hampering of the ability to learn and to employ the competencies needed for the practice of civic life. Needless to say, with this marginalization of civic competencies in favor of deepened fear, cynicism, and apathy, because that's the effect of what happens when you mobilize people on the basis of patronage politics, you create the ideal conditions in which the ability to hold power accountable is drastically reduced or nullified. So you create the conditions where nobody can challenge you because they don't have the information, the mobilization is distorted, and everybody gets mobilized behind his or her political parties. But still again, it must be said that Jamaica's patronage state is more than about patronage. Its raison d'etre is also about the exercise of class dominance through this form of state. Most importantly, the Jamaican state, like all states in capitalist societies, should be regarded as a political expression of a coalition of classes in a highly unequal and class-divided society. So the patronage state is doing patronage, but it's also an expression of the dominant class and social arrangements in the country. So that in this kind of society, myriad forms of discrimination and social exclusion are the norm. So the patronage state, in effect, becomes the guarantor of these unequal relations, while not wholly neglecting the interests of the subordinate classes, right? And this is how capitalist states operate. And Jamaica is just a version of it in the islands. I want to turn next to social classes and the search for accountability. Given the political autonomy of the state in a dependent capitalist society, dominant class rule is never established in uncomplicated and straightforward terms. And the lack of political accountability And the impunity of power should be seen as a symptom not only of corrupt politics, but also as the expression of the weakened social forces that up to the present have been unable to impose their will on the state. The ownership class, for example, has been politically impotent in this regard. On the one hand, the small commercial elite, bankers, industrialists, manufacturers, landowners, big farmers, have benefited from patronage, control of the capitalist economy. On the other hand, they have accommodated it and borne the tremendous cost to their businesses from this form of misrule. So monopolistic partyism has frustrated the smooth and legal forms of wealth accumulation in Jamaica, a problem of doing business in a high crime society for which corrupt politics is partly responsible. Despite the massive economic and other costs associated with doing business in Jamaica under patronage rule, capital-owning groups and their representative organizations have been highly ineffectual in imposing on the political class their demands for accountability and transparency. Now, you would have thought that business people would have an interest in reducing crime and eliminating all of the corruptions associated with it and associated with the patronage state. But stunningly, this doesn't happen in the Caribbean. And it reflects the weakness of the business class to impose their will on the political class. And my friends on the island tell me that you've got to pay to play. So if you want to do business and you want to open a factory, you want to get a license, you'll be tied up in red tape forever unless you pay the toll. You sign the contract and give the political class their take. But a similar condition affects the middle classes, the professional middle class, and this social group, large parts of which have a guilt interest in political reform, in political representation, in the transparency of political decisions, and in the accountability of political institutions. They have been sidelined and frustrated in the reform effort as well. Where they have not been co-opted, so these are the strategies of the patronage state, co-optation. So where the middle class and the professional classes have not been co-opted to form part of its administrative cadre, right? So if you're on the outside and you have some concern, you're encouraged to join the party to improve the situation. Co-optation. Or if you choose to go outside the system and form your radical social movement, then you face repression in the streets if you mobilize a social movement. In general, if you're middle class and you see what we call the dirty politics, right? The dirty politics, the dirty politics, the turbulent, on the hustings politics. You don't typically, if you're a member of the Jamaican professional class, want to rub shoulders with your, with the ordinary people. And so you get out of the political game, thereby again strengthening the patronage state and weakening the business of accountability and reform. So it's no secret that the country's political culture and the mobilizing politics of the patronage states have been deeply suspicious, if not openly hostile, to mainstream norms. Right? Can you imagine? The major political institutions in the country are hostile to mainstream norms. But this is what has happened, right? So that the patronage-built state develops in the people an aversion and scorn for personal responsibility, for empathy for others, for lawful behavior, voluntarism, self-discipline, and the like. So the result is that it has turned the Jamaican people, it has appealed to the worst in the Jamaican people, leaving only the cultivation of piratic instincts, resort to violence, and menace to get their way. So what we have here is not just corrupt political institution, but a debasement of the human. the human being, and the miseducation of the senses. And it has not only hurt the poor, it has weakened the forces of order and decency and civic engagement. So these forces of order are the business classes that I've been describing, the middle class, the working people, the rural folk. These people have been pretty much chased out of politics, chased out of the political arena by the celebration of these anti-system norms and by the entry of organized crime into the state system. So what we have here is a flight from politics of the respectable classes, the main social classes, the classes that have historically led the way in terms of political reform. So, to put it bluntly, despite general capitalist class dominance in the country, they've been able to express that dominance in any way to constrain and put any limit on the political class, right? So that the patronage state rules supreme. You always hear the Marxist analysis that capitalists rule and capitalists dominate and whatever the capitalists want. That doesn't work in the Caribbean. In general, the state favors their interests, accumulation of capital, reproduction of industries and the like. But when it comes to nation building, economic development, investment strategies, they don't dictate to the state all the time. So the patronage state creates this condition. I want to talk a little bit more next about the limitation of these reform-minded groups in the country. The reform-minded groups in Jamaica are weak, poorly funded, and lack a lot of respect from the Jamaican people. That is because they have been depicted as troublemakers, for the most part, people who are rocking the boat, and so on. Sour grape actors, people not playing the game, right? And so they have been smeared by the politicians. Worse, if you raise your voice to complain about the situation and demand reform, you are seen as a creature of the opposition. So there's no independent thinking allowed in these kinds of states. You're either in the party governing or you're in the opposition. But there's no independent civil society groups that can speak. Because if you speak, you're really speaking for the opposition. And they smear you like that, to silence you and shut you up. And that's how they manage to maintain their control over the situation. And the patronage state is a tough, hard to undermine state. It has outlasted all attempts. It has survived economic downturn. It has survived political clashes. It has survived, it doesn't matter whether the country is going socialist or capitalist. It is still there. The patronage state is long-lasting. And it, as I said, it can survive just about anything. It can ride on any political train. It is perennial. So awesome and an entrenched power will not leave the political stage easily. And what I've said here to you today may cause you to be concerned that nothing will change. Well, I think there are some signs of change that I want to point out that are altering this condition. First of all, I think that the external actors are playing a big role in bringing to this condition that I've just described. So the IMF, the World Bank, the UNDP, Transparency International, the Justice Department, the DEA, right? What we can't get done, they apparently have the power to do. If we have scamming, you've heard of the scamming culture across the Caribbean, and we are being scammed in Jamaica, but if a white person from Minnesota gets scammed, two shakes of a ducktail and we have the law passed because the Americans complain and the congressman is upset, right? So the external, I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's the external actors who have seemed to making a big change in the domestic, in the character of the institutions, in the democratization of the institutions, in the putting out of laws of various kinds to interdict crime. It's not the domestic actors, because I've just described how weak they are. I should also mention the case of the Caribbean and Jamaican diaspora. They are coming into their own as well as an important force because the country needs investment. And so all of these millions of Jamaicans abroad have money and have skills and know-how, and the latest thing is to come back home, invest, we'll make it easy for you if you come back home to live. And so they are wielding some power. But it's the external actors that are really dictating the temper of change. I should also add that the Westminster system is also a culprit in this regard, right? Because looking back, it's now apparent that the renovation and imposition of political institutions of Westminster democracy in Jamaica was a mixed blessing. The 1944 Constitution, that's the independence, that's the Universal Suffrage Constitution in Jamaica, it was created in the wake of the 30s labor rebellion, and conceded universal suffrage, gave us the party system, the political institutions of Westminster, right? So that model was an imposition of, the British system on the local scene. And as most people know, Westminster repressed political opinion because it's the first past the post system tends to favor just the two dominant actors, right? And it penalizes third parties. So third parties that would represent political opinions, points of view, ideological perspectives don't get represented because they now are forced into the two-party system. And it's the electoral system associated with it that creates the problem because it's a first past the post system. So minority opinion and parties get locked out. And so effective this has been that no third parties has ever seen the ability to win political office in that country. Now, this is not just a constitutional arcane discussion because it has an impact on accountability, right? And the accountability issue comes up when, other than the Privy Council, that can be an external source of appeal, and a few courts that may not be very, powerful to have any constraint on the political actors. The Westminster system creates two parties in the parliament, and once you win office, you pretty much can dictate to the opposition, and the parliament becomes a talking shop. Yes, now and then you may make amendments to bills and so on, but once you have the majority, you can do any damn thing you want, pretty much. And you also have a cabinet system in which the prime minister is, dominant in the cabinet, and he can have his will because he's head of the party, and everybody listens to him. And that has proven to be a mixed blessing, and for worse, because what has happened is that the advantage that Westminster offered, it's kind of authoritarian. I've described to you Westminster. It's kind of authoritarian because it means that you can get anything you want once you win office. And that authoritarian character of Westminster could have been used for developmental purposes, to push through techno-scientific modernization, industrial, anything that you want that would be great for national development and the power of the country in the world. But Westminster was used in this way to cow political opponents, right? And to get your way. So the Westminster system is abetting the lack of accountability because the opposition party really does not have any other than showboat in the parliament to really criticize the government. And where we have the worst cases of embarrassment, like the Christopher Coke case, we have a commission of inquiry that can take care of that, and we'll have a report that gets shelved and gathers dust. And we have scores of those commissions of inquiry, attending each of the scores of political scandals in the country. So we have evasion and evasion of accountability, inaction, and the lack of implementation. So that it's abundantly clear that the political class in Jamaica has reneged on its obligations to build strong political institutions other than their own. I used to say, other than the political parties. Okay? So Westminster has created problems. And so the new developments taking place in Jamaica seems to be mainly coming from the outside. Internally, the reform groups are fragmented, not well funded, lack leadership, effective leadership, and as I said, are generally greeted with scorn. For example, you've been discussing here the question of homosexuality, right? Human rights. Reform groups, we have similar reform groups in Jamaica, human rights groups in Jamaica. They're greeted with political scorn. What? You want to bring Batmanism into the country? Right? You want to bring homosexuality into the country and make it legal? It's not happening here. And we had a prime minister who declared there are no gay people in my cabinet to reassure the public that he was, following a popular opinion. All right? We have ombudsmen who try to tell the political parties to behave. We have a contractor general who looks over contracts to make sure that the contracts are not being given willy-nilly to political loyalists. We have something called Indicom, and it is a police watchdog. It keeps an eye on the police. We have an electoral commission that makes sure that we have cleaner elections, never clean, but cleaner elections, and they're making a difference. But the system has survived and continues to survive because Dudas occurred in 2010. An electoral commission is long before that, and some of these other agencies and watchdog personalities long before Dudas, right? So it tells you how it can be skirted. These developments can be skirted. I want to end with a cautionary note. I began with a cautionary tale. I want to end with a cautionary note. And this has to do with the difference between procedural and substantive democracy. Procedural democracy has to do with the kinds of things that I just described. Get a contractor general, pass a law, get anti-gang legislation, get an ombudsman, set up an electoral commission. All very necessary, right? Because we must survive today in order to live tomorrow. And we have to catch the criminals, right? And put them in jail. Procedural democracy. But quite often, and this is the phase I think Jamaica and many Caribbean countries find themselves in, is that puzzle solving and technocratic and technical problems is dominating the question of democracy. And democracy is more than what I've just described in terms of putting in place these watchdog agencies, passing these laws, and so on. And that thing that is more is substantive democracy, equal justice, equal access, fair treatment, equal identity, right? We're a multiracial society with certain prejudices against certain people of certain ethnic groups. That is substantive democracy, equal opportunity, no bias and constraint to block access, all right? So reformers, my conclusion is that reformers of all stripes have to pay attention to democracy as not mere puzzle solving and technical and managerial, right? Good governance, right? Everybody is into good governance now, all to the good, but not to forget the long horizon. And so it seems to me that if the process of reform occurring in Jamaica today is to flourish, change makers must keep the far horizon in view and develop the strategies for moving from a condition of mobilized dependency to one of civic competence. The full restoration of Jamaica's democratic system depends on the recovery of this lost ideal. Thank you very much.